Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Mehmet Kılıç. I'm the president of the Journalists and Writers Foundation. Today is May 3rd, 2022, World Press Freedom Day 2022. Thank you so much for joining us in our virtual discussion with the theme of Reflections on Press Freedom. Today, we have amazing event and amazing speakers. You will hear the stories of journalists covering world affairs, risking their lives and freedom to report on conflicts, inform people of press freedom violations, and at the same time, reminding governments of their commitment to ensure press freedom. We will learn about the roles of press freedom in protecting our basic human and civil rights. Journalists are at the forefront of reporting news and face multiple challenges in informing citizens of their new developments happening in the world. Therefore, we would like to hear and learn about the stories and challenges journalists facing, as they cover the world affairs and also, wars and conflicts. Journalists play an important role to remind governments of their commitment to press freedom and access to free flow of information. Today, I have the pleasure and honor to introduce our host today. Yazid Kamaldian, a freelance journalist from South Africa, will moderate the discussion. Let me give you a little background about Yazid. Yazid is a freelance journalist and independent documentary filmmaker from Cape Town, South Africa. He is a co-founder member of the International Association for Religion Journalists. His focus is on social justice and human rights, while also doing some reporting on religion and culture. His short films include Imagina na Copa in 2014, filmed in Brazil, Inside Kobane, a film in Turkey and Syria, filmed in 2015, and This War, Our Home in 2017, filmed in Cape Town. He was based in Yemen, where he reported on the Arab Spring in 2011. He also reported from the Gaza Strip in 2009 and has been on various journalism scholarship, notably a Duke Media Fellow at Duke University in North Carolina in the US in 2019. He was the production manager of the Emmy Award-winning documentary film Miners Shut Down in 2014. His work has been published in numerous newspapers and magazines, and he has so much experience in the field as well. Please welcome Yazid Kamaldian. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teşekkürler, Mehmet, for that introduction. I really appreciate it. So yeah, as Mehmet said, today is World Press Freedom Day, and there are a number of reports that have been put out by professional bodies that are tracking our freedom. We are all journalists today on this discussion. It's a dialogue about our work and how, the desire to do our work ethically and effectively has, for some of us, impacted our personal lives negatively. Now, I will point out some resources that are on the internet that have been published right now, today, in fact. So the 20th World Press Freedom Index has been published by Reporters Without Borders. And that is information on how things are going for journalists in various parts of the world that is available online. It assesses the state of journalism in 180 territories and countries, and it also highlights the disastrous effects of news and what they call information chaos. The Committee to Protect Journalists has a strong focus on Ukraine, and we'll be talking to journalists about that today in our discussion. And they're also focusing on Afghanistan. And they've launched, they've put out a report that looks at various parts of the world as well, from Africa to the Americas, Asia, Europe, and Central Asia. And then also the well-known World Press Photo Foundation has also put out a statement today talking about world press freedom and saying that it's a date to celebrate and evaluate the fundamental principles of press freedom, defend the media from attacks on their independence, and pay tribute to journalists who have lost their lives in the exercise of their profession. Now, today we are going to Ukraine first. We are going to be talking to Isabel, and she's joining us online. Isabel, hi, good morning. Welcome to yeah, welcome all of you. In fact, we'll be talking to JJ Green and of course also to Abdullah. These are our three speakers today. They're dialing in from Stockholm in Sweden and also from Washington, DC in the US. But let's first go to Isabel. Isabel, tell us where you're reporting from. You look like you're chasing a deadline. What's happening?
No, I'm actually not. I've already filed. I'm in Kharkiv, so that's in eastern Ukraine, and we're just leaving. So that's what part of the rush is. And yeah, today, so we've just been we're just doing a story about the kind of the war damage here, and because Kharkiv has a lot of sort of historic buildings that have been hit. I don't know if you've seen the videos of like basically the first 2 weeks of March. Like Russian forces hit the center quite badly, and like almost an entire like street was destroyed, taken down by the airstrike. So yeah, we've just been covering that today, and then we also looked at like the kind of just humanitarian problems. So the fact that nobody's working here, and a lot of people are now living off humanitarian aid. And now we're heading back out. We just went to photograph some more damage from today.
Isabel, just for our viewers, can you just confirm who you are reporting for and tell us a bit about how long you've been there?
Yeah, sure. So I'm working for The Guardian, and I've been here from the start. I went out for 1 week for a break, but otherwise I've been here, and I just happened to be here when it started, and then stayed like other journalists, but I didn't come here specifically to report on it. So I didn't have any experience in reporting on conflicts really before this. So it's all quite new. Now I'm getting used to it, I think. But I haven't done any kind of like really serious frontline reporting. I've been like pretty close, and I've been in areas where there's been lots of shelling, but not up to sort of military positions and things like that.
Isabel, how safe do you feel though? I mean, we are all watching the news, you know, from different parts of the world. And especially in the early days, the footage that was coming out, you know, it was very devastating. Buildings, you know, bombed. You know, we've also seen stories of journalists being killed in crossfire. How safe do you feel where you are?
I mean, I feel it sort of varies. I think at the beginning I felt very unsafe because again I really wasn't used to working in these kind of environments, and it really felt like shelling was happening everywhere at random at different times, and I was in Kiev for most of that period, and Kiev is a city which I've like spent some of my childhood in, and then lived in as an adult. So it was really strange for me to suddenly be in a situation where I couldn't, you know, just walk 200 meters to see my friend. You know, we were just kind of stuck indoors essentially. You know, we went out to do reporting and went back. Like there was no socializing. Apart from I think there was one day where I risked it and I went across to see a friend. But yeah, and just, you know, all the bridges were blown up and stuff like that. And now it is still bad in some areas, and like, you know, touch wood, it kind of stays quiet in other areas. But it seems to be more of a battle between the military at this point, and they still are shelling civilian areas, but it's not the sort of scale of the terror campaign which they were carrying out at the beginning. I think to try and get people to either give it. People are still living under occupation.
And, you know, I'm curious also to know what kind of support structures there might be for journalists, or how people are, or how journalists, how the professionals are kind of organizing themselves. I know, for example, from when I went to Syria, you know, I traveled with other journalists to feel safe, to be quite frank. You know, we felt more secure traveling together. Even when I was in Yemen, there was kind of like a kind of checking in on each other as well. I mean, how is it working on the ground, or are people too spread out? And how's communication between journalists? You know, are people kind of, you know, helping or supporting each other in any way? How's that going?
So I think it's quite varied. I'd say overall, all of the journalists that I've met here seem very friendly, very willing to help each other out. But it's a huge country, and I'd say, like, as a freelancer, I'm not sure if, unless you had a lot of experience doing this sort of stuff, I wouldn't recommend that you come here. Or if you have the language, that's, you know, that's a different story. But I have met the occasional freelancer who's come out here on a limb, you know, without a translator, a fixer, a car. You know, they're trying to do things by public transport, and I think that's like pretty dangerous. I mean, now things have, you know, there's kind of like a new war normal, so there are kind of ways that you can get around. You can get taxis in the bigger cities and stuff like that, but even so, yeah, I'd say it's quite dangerous. And like I would say on the kind of, when you say people are spread out, yeah, Ukraine is a huge country, but there are a lot of journalists in all the kind of major cities. So pretty much when you go to a city like Kharkiv, there's only a few hotels that are open, and they're almost, all the rooms are almost exclusively occupied by journalists. So you immediately come in and you can meet people, and yeah, people do share contacts and people to help each other out. There's also like a Facebook group which people can join, which deals with sort of logistics and safety. And you know, people post stuff in there. Like sometimes people just posting tips, you know, I took this route, or people asking questions, and everyone seems to get replies. It seems to be pretty like collegiate in that way.
I just quickly want to acknowledge some of the comments that are coming through on the YouTube channel as well. Ahmed Omerolu says, to have real democracy, we need independent media and freedom of journalists. That is an acknowledgement for our professional freedom that we need. And then also Tanzel Danish says that she's very interested in the topic. And thank you very much for this. Now let's bring in JJ Green. Now, JJ, you are reporting from Washington. And just before we started, you said that you are headed to Eastern Europe soon. Tell us briefly, by way of introduction, a bit about your work and what you'll be doing and how you've been focusing on the Ukraine.
Well, thank you to the Journalists and Writers Foundation for inviting me to be a part of this group, this distinguished group. And certainly this organization has been on the forefront since 1994 of a very important topic and a very important issue that is probably no more important than it is right now because of the threat that journalism and journalists face all around the world and have faced for a long time, but no more so than right now. I've been working as a national security correspondent with WTOP here in Washington for 18 years now, and I've traveled to more than 50 countries in the process, and have done some very rewarding and satisfying journalism because of the ability to go to different places. My objective is truth, seeking it, sharing it, and making sure that people understand it. When there are wars and conflicts, that's what I and others who do what I do, that's where we go. I'm not going to talk so much about Eastern Europe because, well, that's just not something that I should do at this point. But I will say to you that, you know, going to that area is something that I think every journalist needs to try to do during this war. Certainly that those that cover the area that I cover, national and international security. And I will say that in covering this war, it's very important to look at the nuances of the war. It's not just the bullets and the bombs that are going on. It's what's taking place behind the scenes. A large part of the work that I do on a daily basis is intelligence and espionage, terrorism. There's also, you know, the activity that goes on, you know, behind the scenes with the Kremlin, the malign actors, the hybrid warfare, information warfare, those kinds of things. They're very important. And in doing so, you know, it's important to develop and build sources. And that's what I've been doing here, you know, during this war. There've only been a few days that I haven't worked since this war started on the 24th of February. Frankly, we started around the 12th, way before the war started, getting ready for it. But it's been a a very difficult situation to cover from here, but I can imagine it's much more difficult for our colleagues over there covering it there because of the fact that they're under threat, physical threat, constantly running and worrying. So this is a scenario I believe that, um, the world has not seen this in 70 years plus, since close to, 80 years since World War II. And this is something that the world needs to understand and see, and journalists putting their lives on the line for it. That is absolutely the most admirable thing I can think of right now, that these folks are putting their lives on the line to tell this story and to get it right. That's really the important thing, to make sure that they get this story right. And that is, what I aspire to, and I think everybody on this call and all the other credible and um, active journalists around the world involved in this are.
So you said you cover national security here in the United States and you're based in Washington, D.C. Have you faced any risks or threats because of your journalism? Or are you quite well protected in the space that you are in?
Yes and no. Yes to your first question. Yes, I have faced threats. I've been abroad, and I've been, for instance, in Iraq, and with colleagues who were killed. And this was back during the early days, 2006 and 7 of the Iraq War. And, with colleagues who were injured in a physical sense. But to your second question about being protected here in the US, no. And here's why. A part of that is because America had a heart attack on the 6th of January. And that heart attack, like a physical heart attack, had warning signs that came along with it. And a lot of people in our country ignored those warning signs. They ignored what we knew was coming. And in some ways, the threats against journalists, the threats against journalism, calling journalists the enemy, this, that, and the other, it all led to an explosion of animosity. And frankly, what we saw on Capitol Hill during the 6th of January, a riot, that was a symptom of a much larger problem. I will say this about the threat that I face and that others face here in Washington. It's not so much a physical threat. This is another kind of threat that most folks don't think about. The US is, I think, number 42 on the World Press Freedom Index. And that's shocking to some people. And a part of the reason why is because information has been weaponized here in Washington. And a good example of that is this morning, a very important opinion from a Supreme Court justice, a draft decision about a very important topic in this country, and I say arguably around the world, was leaked. Somebody decided to leak it. And I know that there's a very serious investigation that's going on now into who did it and the motivation, et cetera. But the point that I'm making, Azid, is this. There are so many people in Washington now who have allowed ideology to trump their responsibility as officials and I think responsible citizens to do what's best for them and their interest in power. And this is not just something that happens in the US. It happens all over the place, but a lot of people just don't expect it to happen here, but it does happen here. And I will say as well, there are people here who are more interested in their power, and this is from both political parties, more interested in their power and what it is that they get out of this. I call it, in the words of H.R. McMaster, the former National Security Advisor, strategic narcissism. Folks that are more interested in what they get out of it than what it is their responsibility is to journalists and journalism, and certainly to our audience. That is the biggest threat now. So what you see is certain journalists being marginalized. If they don't fit into a narrative, or if they aren't friends, or if they're not favorites of certain members of certain organizations all across the government, from the executive throughout other branches, they get pushed aside. That is a very dangerous thing. And that is a part of the reason why what happened on January 6th went the way it did. It's because of this anger and animosity that was created and has been, the flames have been fanned by this uneven journalism that causes people to do things that you don't expect and certainly don't want to happen. And it can happen even here in the US.
Yeah. JJ, just share that I am currently based in the US, even though I'm from South Africa. I'm based here in the Northeast coast at the moment. And there definitely was a sense from the outside that journalism in America was directly attacked by your former president. You know, the former president, Donald Trump, used to call journalists out all the time. There was this constant attack saying journalists are spreading fake news. How did that impact on how people viewed the credibility of journalists? Because it was a sustained attack on journalists over a number of years by the former president.
It had a horrible impact. It was a very negative impact. It put people's lives in danger. And I know a number of journalists who were attacked because they were journalists, which is something that you just didn't see here in the US very frequently. But this happened a lot in the 4 years during the previous administration. And again, this is not a political statement that I'm making. I am not partial to either one. I'm just speaking as a journalist. This was a situation where people were targeted. And this is not something that the Trump administration only does. The current administration has its own faults and failings. The previous administration before the Trump administration had its own faults and failings. The administrations before the Obama administration had faults and failings. So like I said, this is not a political thing. This is a power thing. And what happened during the last administration, of course, before the Biden administration, was it just went to the extreme. And this was a confluence of the confluence of elements that converged from social media to authoritarian activities overseas, and certainly having people here in the US that drove this narrative that we journalists were enemies was a part of why things got so bad here for journalists. Certainly a good example very quickly is I have a lot of friends in the Asian Pacific Islander community who were seriously targeted after the George Floyd murder here in the US. And a lot of people tried to blame it on protest about that. That wasn't the case. What took place was that people who did not like journalists, who did not like anybody of any color, for example, took that opportunity and took essentially what they thought was permission from these high-level officials to go after journalists as an opportunity to do it. And that's a part of what took place during that time frame. And unfortunately, we haven't fixed that issue yet because, like I said, this is not something that was unique to the Trump administration, although they did it a different way. All administrations need to understand that every journalist is equal and valuable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, JJ. So just to recap, today is World Press Freedom Day, and we are linking up with journalists to hear their personal narratives of how they have been reporting and what the threats and challenges are that they face. Of course, we still have Isabel with us. She's out in the Ukraine. Isabel, if at any point you stop your car and you want to show us what's happening around you, feel free to do that as well. You know, it's a story that we're all watching. JJ is out in Washington, and now we are going to Abdullah. And Abdullah is calling us from Stockholm in Sweden. And he's got a personal story to share as well of challenges that he's faced reporting, of course, in Turkey. Abdullah, welcome. Please tell us a bit about yourself and, of course, the challenge and the risk that you faced as a journalist.
Thank you, Yazid, for having me here in a distinguished panelist. And thank you for the Journalists and the Writers Foundation for organizing this event. I can just start by picking up from the points that JJ raised. I think I can relate a lot of talking points he has talked in his introductory speech. We have seen a similar trends in Turkey. When we saw what the Trump administration had done, it sounded very much familiar with many Turkish journalists, because Erdogan, the President Erdogan, has done the same thing in Turkey. I think the turning point was in 2013, December, when a major corruption investigation was exposed, incriminating President Erdogan. He was prime minister at the time, his inner circle. It was an unprecedented corruption case in terms of the figure that involved and the senior government officials who were implicated in this major scandal. It involved the Iranian sanction buster, who was bribing the government officials, providing lots of millions of the cash in exchange of using the Turkish state banks to move the funds in spite of the sanction regime, and as well as in a guy who was listed as an Al-Qaeda financier, is a Saudi national, both the U.S. Treasury and the United Nations Security Council sanction list. He was listed there, and despite all this sanction and the Turkish laws, prohibiting him from traveling to Turkey from Turkey, he was coming to Turkey with the Prime Minister Erdogan's plane, meeting with him, meeting with intelligence officials, running the show in the Syrian file and Egyptian file at the time, and also moving a lot of money. So when this case broke in the court of law, we started publishing in our newspaper, which was the largest national daily at the time. And as JJ mentioned and others before him, the people in the power started targeting our newspaper. President Erdogan in public rallies and the meetings, calling our newspaper, as a voice of traitors, and asking his supporters not to purchase the newspaper. But it actually worked the other way around because we are still publishing, the excerpts from the corruption case. Our circulation actually went up 1.2 million copies on a daily basis, although our advertisers, some of them pulled back because of the fear from the government wrath and the pressure. But our subscribers went up dramatically. So it was a win for us. But Erdogan didn't stop there. They orchestrated a fake criminal case against the newspaper, and eventually 2 years later they seized the newspaper. It's also an unprecedented move in Turkey because our constitution and the Turkish laws are very strong when it comes to protecting the media outlets and the press freedom, although we have a number of challenges in terms of the press freedom even before that. But the seizing of a media outlet, especially the largest nationally circulated newspaper, was unprecedented. And after that, of course, many journalists and found other financiers and established new media outlets. And the government, orchestrated a fake false coup in 2016, and using that as a pretext, they shut down over 200 media outlets on a single day. It's unbelievable. And they start arresting so many journalists, becoming Turkey one of the leading jailer of the journalists in the world. And I think at one time it became the number one, more than the Iran, Egypt, Russia, and all the others combined. The number of the jailed journalists is more when it comes to Turkey. So when that happened, I didn't feel safe enough staying in Turkey. I had to move out. And my initial thought, I can hunker down abroad for a while, and when the dust settles, I can go back to Turkey. But it didn't work out the way I planned, because the government started coming after the family members and the relatives of the journalists. In one prominent case, for example, when they couldn't find an editor-in-chief of National Daily, they arrested the wife. So my plan was changed very quickly. I had to take my family out of Turkey as well. I was actually traveled to South Africa in the meantime, to talk about the press freedom when my family is still back in Turkey. Then eventually they managed to get out as well. But even today, the number of the journalists, I think over 100 people. Some of them very dear colleague of mine. I had worked for many years side by side in Ankara, and still languishing behind bars. And I think that was the key for solidifying the autocratic nature of the Erdogan government in Turkey. When they shut down the voices of the people, the media outlets who are publishing the truth and the facts, then it's easy to go after the institutions. They crumble very quickly. Our initial thought when the government started targeting, so many media outlets and the journals, we thought, I mean, our institutions are strong enough to resist the pressure. We can take this to the court. We can take this to the public audience. We can use other venues to fight back, to push back against the government pressure. But it didn't play out the way we thought. All of them crumbled. And the terrible lesson I think we took out of this saga, you cannot take your freedoms granted. I mean, you have to cherish each and every day. If you give an inch, they take it, with arms. So I mean, even a smallest, slightest sign, early indicators, you need to stay on your ground. You don't, negotiate on your freedoms and the fundamental rights. Otherwise, it becomes very quickly as like a avalanche. You cannot, stop it anymore. I think that's the case in Turkey. Now I find myself in Stockholm, trying to cover Turkey from the distance with all the challenges and the shortcomings. I know the value of the reporting from the ground, as Isabel is doing right now from Ukraine. And I cannot do it. I cannot travel to Turkey. I cannot even travel to third countries which are sort of friendly with Turkey, because I'm facing an outstanding arrest warrant. They abuse international, law enforcement cooperation mechanism like Interpol. And luckily, so far, Interpol did not accept the sort of arrest warrant disseminated through Interpol system. But on the bilateral level, you see this harassment going on all the time. And the long arm of the Turkish government, you can feel it in Stockholm. I was assaulted more than a year ago in front of my house by 3 people waiting for me. And I suspect it has to do with my writings, because I didn't know these guys at all. And I can understand it comes with a job. You pay a terrible price. But I mean, your family pays a price, but at the same time, you think you are doing a public service. You are disseminating the facts and the truth against the government propaganda machinery. They have huge resources, finances, manpower, but still the facts matter. I mean, I think that's why a small, website I'm running out of Stockholm as an investigative journalist, they still bothers Turkey, because I get the court judgment through Twitter. They get, the partisan judges in Turkey, they can quickly get a gag order or blocking of your, website in Turkey. That means what I do does matter and bother people in power. I think I'll keep doing it despite all the challenges we face, and that comes with the territory, I suppose.
Wow, Abdullah, thank you for sharing that with us, and also sharing, the personal narratives. That's really what we want to get into today. The stories of journalists who are risking their lives, for the truth. That's really what we're doing. We're going out there and we're telling stories that matter. We want people to know what's happening. Now, Isabel, Joe Okumu asks this question, and Joe says, even though no one expected the sanctions against Russia to work, to what extent are the sanctions achieving the objective? You don't have to answer this question. It's just a question that came through particularly related to the Ukraine. But the fact that there's still attacks from Russia on Ukraine perhaps is an indication that the sanctions aren't really working. Do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share on that, Isabel?
Yeah, definitely. So I think unfortunately, if 10 years ago Russia worried about its reputation and worried about its economy, They don't now, and basically Putin's objective is to control Ukraine, and it is even if they take that southern stretch, which is allegedly their new aim, so from Moldova all the way to Russia, which gives them also like a land route from Crimea to Russia, which is essentially what they occupy right now. That won't be enough for them, because it will still bother them that, you know, there is like a country just above that which doesn't want them there. So I think, you know, that they're basically, it's, you know, it's all or nothing. Either they control it, or I mean, and to control it, they would have to constantly suppress, you know, dissent, opposition, maybe some sort of like partisan warfare style situation, or you know, Ukraine wins. But I mean, how long that will take and how long it's to go on for, it's not clear. But I definitely don't think, I mean, what the sanctions are doing and will probably continue to do is they're like inhibiting their ability to develop weapons, inhibiting their capacities to sort of like show their population that everything's fine, which was the case up until 2022. Even though they were under some sanctions, but they kind of showed people that, you know, we can still live with sanctions. You know, we can overcome. I don't think that will be the case this time. I think the sanctions are much more comprehensive. And I think that the Russian economy is suffering already, which means that the long term it's definitely going to suffer. So I think the sanctions will be effective, but the ideology of, like, you know, we want this great Russia, you know, Ukrainians are just Russians who've gone on the wrong path, and we need to put them back on the right path. That won't go away, and I don't think that will go away at this point, even if Putin was to go. Because I think that the ideology has kind of grasped the nation, and in a big way. It's hard to tell like what percentage of the population, you know, believes the propaganda, but it's certainly the majority. You know, I don't know if it's the sort of 80% which the Russian polls say it is, but you know, I would say it's a very large chunk, and you can kind of tell that from all the kind of posts on social media, the Z, or I don't know if you say Z in America,
Isabel is breaking up a bit, but it's obviously she's on the move. Isabel is just frozen a bit. I've also looked at some of the stories that she's done. Hi, Isabel, are you still with us?
that you can scroll everywhere. I mean, it's also very difficult to tell because Western media outlets have now left Russia. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. I guess turning off the video has definitely helped with the audio. Isabel, something else I want to say as well is that I've looked at your stories, and what's really interesting is that you're getting also into the nuances, you know, the impact of conflict. It's not just the broad political conversation between Russia and Ukraine, but actually getting into the people stories. And that's, of course, the advantage you have from being on the ground. I mean, one story published on The Guardian that you wrote looks at the rush to get emergency contraception into Ukraine as reports of rape arise. I mean, that's talking about an even greater vulnerable group now. Not only is there war, but there's also rape, unfortunately, that's happening. And that's a story, you know, that's definitely an important story to get out there. I'm just looking at the story that you did, you know, about that. And yeah, like the nuances, how is it going for you in terms of balancing this sort of like keeping your eye on the big picture, which is, you know, what Russia's doing, and then also these nuances, these stories that are coming to you, that you're seeing all around you of the impact. Okay, Isabel's frozen, unfortunately. There's another question that I would like to ask as well, and JJ and Abdullah, either one of you can go for this. Kamal asks, you know, there's a lot of populism, you know, that's rising, you know, under this umbrella of press freedom. And Kamal is asking, let me just see if that's Kamal. Sorry, no, that was Serdar. Serdar is saying, you know, there's a quote unquote dangerous wave of populism under the golden umbrella of media freedom. Guys, sorry, I'm sorry to do this, but since we've got Isabel back, Isabel, I was just mentioning the last question, just talking about your journalism that I'm seeing online. You're really bringing out the nuances and the impact of conflict on people. I don't know if you heard me mentioning that the one story that I saw of yours, the headline in The Guardian reads, "The rush to get emergency contraception into Ukraine as reports of rape arise." So reporting on even, you know, the detail on the ground is important as well. And how are you finding that, you know, the balance between the big picture, watching what Russia is doing, and then also, you know, all these other stories coming at your house? Can you reflect about on that experience?
I mean, yeah, it's very difficult. It's very difficult, and particularly with the rape stories. You can hear me, can't you?
Yes,
yeah.
we can.
Particularly, particularly.
We unfortunately seem to have lost Isabel again. Let's go to the question by Serdar. You know, so Serdar is saying, you know,
How
hey man, this is how it goes, right? Like, you're in the field, technology isn't always going to be on your side. I'm going to summarize Serdar's question very, very quickly, okay? And the question in a nutshell is, how do we...
Oh, sorry about this. Sorry, I'm back now.
Oh, yes, we understand.
So I just wanted to, you can hear me now. I'll just go without the camera. I'll do it without the camera. So yeah, basically, I think it was just very difficult because I wasn't sure how showing personal stories to the media was necessarily going to help these women, because it's an incredibly traumatic thing to go through occupation, to go through shelling, to see people being shot in the streets, to see people being tortured, you know, and then to be raped yourself. And then, you know, have a good journalist come and say, oh, you know, I want to do an interview so that I can, for me, that was like, I didn't want to do that at all. So what we kind of sort of steered towards instead was basically, you know, finding the people that have interacted with these women. So second-hand information, essentially, you know, people who we felt that we could trust because of their position in, you know, in a community or in society in general. And that's kind of how we approached it. You know, other journalists did it differently. Perhaps they happened upon these women, which I think happened in the case of the BBC. But even so, I just wasn't, and it's something that I haven't researched, I haven't looked at. So this is just my personal opinion as it stands now. I'm just not sure if I have the training and I'm the right person to interview those women, because I'm already feeling in a lot of situations that I'm re-traumatizing people by asking them to retell their story. And it's a very fine line. A lot of people, in a way, it seems, or at least that's what they say, no, it helps me to retell the story because I feel like at least I'm getting the story out there, at least I'm doing something good for everybody else by letting people know what's happening here. So they feel it's kind of like their duty to do it. So and you know, maybe that is the case, maybe it does help, thinking, you know, well, at least my story might have you know, might be used later in a court, or might be used to prove that this did really happen, or whatever it might be. So, you know, maybe that does help people. But it is you know, what happened to people is extreme. Like the story that I covered over the weekend with this guy, he was he's a former drug addict, former prisoner, then found God, you know, was working in this rehabilitation center, which helped him. He was beaten by Russian soldiers, tied to a quad bike, dragged, you know, about 400 meters. He was told that if he didn't run, then they would shoot him in the head. You know, then he was put on the floor. They leaned on a sort of rifle into his back, basically cracking parts of, like, just horrific. And then it carried on, you know, the whole story, you can read it, but and that was one that I did with my colleagues. But it's just he was said, you know, well, I've already, because he told the story to a Christian channel already. He's like, oh, I've already told this. And I said, and we said, you know, do you want? And he said, no, I want to, I must. But I just still felt like, and then you leave that person and you think, well, what am I leaving that? I'm leaving them alone, kind of thing. Of course, he's not alone, but it just feels like it's a very fine line between getting the story and kind of abuse. You know, it can feel a little bit like abusive, because I think you got to take the time, and sometimes with news, you feel like you don't have that time. So it's you know, it basically it's double energy to make sure that you're taking care of these people and not going too far with it, but also making sure that you get things out. So yeah.
Well, Isabel, we certainly do hope that at some point you'll be taking care of yourself as well, because of course there is a very real thing as secondary trauma. I hope, just wanted to share that, you know, because journalists also need to take care of ourselves. We also need to take care of ourselves. Let's just put that on the record, since we're talking about World Press Freedom today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is very real. And like, just listening to JJ Green talk and Abdullah talk, like, it, you know, which were both incredibly interesting stories, by the way. It is very real. And I think like for instance, when I went on break, I made sure to post on my Facebook, because a lot of my friends who are Ukrainian, they won't take a break, because they think, well, you know, nobody else is taking a break. My friends and family aren't taking a break, so I'm not going to. And like I think it is very unhealthy. So I try and be very open about the fact that I do that, in order to say to other people, you know, it's okay to do that. Like, what you're doing isn't. I mean, I think it's wrong to compare to different roles, but you are going out and you're going to places all the time and talking to people all the time, and sort of absorbing those stories. So I think, yeah, it is really important to do that. Yeah, but it's kind of inevitable that you're going to feel like a range of emotions in these kind of situations.
Yes, just a quick, can I just make a quick comment?
Absolutely. We have just about 7 minutes left. So this is dialogue time, conversation time. We're just going to feel free to jump in, you know?
Right. To some extent, I think I can relate to what Isabel feeling in Ukraine, because we saw the similar challenges when we try to cover the torture and the rape stories in Turkish prison and detention facilities. Right after this false flag coup attempt in 2016, which helped President Erdogan remove almost entire, senior generals and admirals who served in the NATO posts. That was the main purpose, actually, of this false flag. Almost entire staff officers who served in the NATO posts, from Lisbon to Oslo to United States, Italy, everywhere else, they were simply removed, whether they had anything to do with the coup or not. Most of them actually were vacationing. But when we approached the family members, almost all of them, they didn't want us to write and they share the torture and the rape stories that took actually place in detention facilities and the prisons. But when they eventually, the cases went to the court, these officers themselves, some of them, not all of them, they actually told their stories in the courtroom. So we eventually managed to get our hands on the transcript of the court records and started writing about it. Even these are the public records, but not many of them actually in Turkey writing about it, because the government simply decimated the free, critical, and independent media outlets, and the very few remaining, they are very much afraid of covering these very sensitive stories. So from the distance, we try to cover this rape and the torture stories that took place. It was very traumatic experience. I mean, you read between the lines, it's horrible stories. But even after we published this, based on this publicly available records, some of the family members, they were reaching out to, asking us to take down the story because they don't want to, expose themselves further because of the shame factor. Understandably, perhaps, but it's a tough decision. Eventually, me and my colleagues in this investigative media outlets, we decided, well, this is based on the publicly available records, and these are the officers themselves, telling their terrible saga they experienced by the police in detention facilities. So, I mean, it is a horrible situation. You don't want to find yourself in this position, but at the same time, you feel obligated to disseminate this story, to share story that tell the world what's actually going on, because for example, the Council of Europe actually visited Turkey, and they interviewed many of these officers. They told the similar stories to these Council of Europe investigators, and the report was never published. Because the Turkish government veto. Obviously, they needed a Turkish government consent to put this Council of Europe report on their website. And the Turkish government, since 2016, they never gave the consent. So the officers, the stories didn't, actually find themselves in this report. So it leaves us, as a journalist, as a, reporters, to tell the world what's going on without any, any catch. I think it's not easy. It's a tough job, but I think it needs to be done to put the record in straight.
It's not easy and it's tough, but we love it, guys. Let's be honest, we love doing journalism. This is our life. JJ, do you want to add anything? We have like 3 minutes left. We've been listening to Isabel. We've been listening to Abdullah. Like, is there anything you want to add? You're muted.
Sorry. I'm incredibly proud to be able to talk with Isabel and Abdullah and you and the Journalists and Writers Foundation and all of the people that are joining in today about freedom and what it means. The press is one of the pillars of freedom, and it always will be. And one of the things that I think is really important that, to me resonates every day, every single day, is that, it's really a simple thing that we have to do, as Abdullah was just saying, is to tell the truth. People want to know the truth and they deserve to know the truth. Knowing what the limits are is very important. As Isabel said so eloquently, you sometimes feel, hey, how far do I go with this? Because you have to take into consideration, balance telling the story against the damage that it could do to the person who the story is about. But one of the things I'd like to say is that, so in addition to the work that I do on the radio and in print, I've got a YouTube program called Global with JJ Green, where hopefully some of these folks that are here today, I can have you come talk to us about your work. But the objective there is truth. Evgenia Kara-Murza, who's the wife of Vladimir Kara-Murza, talked to me about the value of truth in Russia. Natalia Arno from the Free Russia Foundation, a number of people from Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, and we have ambassadors from all over Lithuania, Estonia, and other places, Latvia, talking about the value of truth. And it's it's incredibly important right now more than ever, that people know the truth, know what's happening in the mind of Vladimir Putin, the FSB, the people, the apparatus that made him what he is. And that apparatus extends well beyond Russia. And there are people who think like that all over the world, including here in the US. So it's not just these places, these despots, these tyrants that are a problem. There are people all over the world in all different places that think that way. So it's up to us to make sure we continue to tell the truth at every turn.
Mhm. Certainly, what is clear is that it's not just the direct physical attack on journalists and journalism that can hinder press freedom. There are various players, various people trying various ways to silence the media. JJ shared that with us. Abdullah shared that with us as well. And of course, Isabel is in a space where journalists have physically been killed for trying to tell the story. Colleagues, that is actually all we have time for. I want to thank you so much for being with me today, for being with the Journalists and Writers Foundation today as well. Isabel, we wish you all the best with your field work in Ukraine.
Thank you so much. It's been really interesting, and I feel really honored to be invited alongside the rest of the panelists. So thank you.
You've been great. It's been wonderful having you with us.
I feel like we could have spoken for 2 hours instead of 1, but yeah.
Easily. Today's World Press Freedom Day, we really just wanted to gather, and I'm so glad that everybody could join us today. So Isabel, all the best to you. Okay, Abdullah in Stockholm, all the best to you as well. We just hope that you stay safe where you are now, and continue the good work that you're doing. JJ, reporting on national security in Washington, D.C., all the best to you as well for your upcoming journeys as well. So from myself, Yazid Kamaldin, I want to thank the organizers of this event, the Journalists and Writers Foundation, Mehmet, the president of the foundation, and Cemre and Esra, who's working on this project as well. From myself, Yazid Kamaldin, that's it for today. And to all the journalists working out there, let's keep doing it. Thank you so much.